Good afternoon. The government is holding urgent talks with representatives of the energy industry about the sharp rise in wholesale gas prices. There are warnings the increased costs, already affecting some businesses, could also mean higher bills for domestic consumers. It's understood that 4 small energy companies are set to go bust next week. Strong global demand is one of the reasons prices are at record highs. Here's our business correspondent, Katie Austin.
Gas is a key source of the energy that heats our homes and powers our industries. Since the start of the year, wholesale prices have soared, almost doubling in the UK, prompting the government to hold urgent talks with the energy industry today. Reasons for the increase include lower wind and solar output, high demand and reduced supply from Russia.
The conversations with the government this week are about how we get through a short-term crisis and then how we transform our industry so that this doesn't happen again.
The unprecedented costs are already taking their toll. 4 small energy suppliers have gone bust in the past few days, with more expected to follow as soon as next week. Steel makers, which need a lot of energy, are worried.
If they're at this price now, what's it going to be like in the winter? And if it carried on like this, then I'm really fearful of not just the steel sector, but all energy-intensive sectors and then downstream operations, because that's what we do. We're at the start of that supply chain. We sell to manufacturers.
High energy prices have already forced 2 large UK fertiliser plants in the north of England to close. One consequence is a shortage of their crucial byproduct carbon dioxide, and that could hit food and drink businesses, because it's used to stun some animals before slaughtering and for meat packing. Meat processors fear the shortage could hit production.
It's used to extend shelf life through packaging, not just in meat, but on all foods. And at a time when we're struggling because of the haulage shortages in this country to keep the supply chain running, to actually lose shelf life and have a shorter shelf life on the products going onto shelves, this is going to cause even more disruption. So this is a really serious problem for us.
The online food delivery company Ocado says it now has limited stock of some frozen foods because the squeeze on carbon dioxide means it can't get enough dry ice. The trade body representing major supermarkets said the disruption couldn't have come at a worse time, with the lorry driver shortage already causing issues.
The rising price of gas is mainly being felt by businesses at the moment, but it is likely to feed through into higher bills for consumers at a time when the cost of living is already rising.
The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, says Britain can meet demand for gas and the government doesn't expect supply emergencies this winter. But when it comes to prices, there are global factors at play. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Well, our political correspondent Nick Eardley is here. The news in the last few minutes that 4 small energy companies have already gone bust because of all this. I mean, that adds urgency to the government's talks with the energy sector this weekend and into next week.
It absolutely does, Clive. I mean, the main thing the government is trying to emphasise this afternoon is that it's not panicking. The message from ministers is that there is sufficient capacity and supply to meet demand over the winter months. But it is being taken seriously. There are a series of meetings going on across Whitehall today, the Business Secretary meeting with companies and operators, officials from the Environment Department meeting with food suppliers as well, particularly pork and chicken suppliers who we know are concerned about packaging, potential packaging shortages. Labour argue that this is down to a government failure to plan long term, and that's left the country vulnerable. They're particularly worried about what you heard in Katie's piece there, the cost of living and potential for some increases in prices at the same time as some taxes are going up and universal credit is being reduced. But as I say, ministers think that supply is secure, that there's not going to be widespread disruption. They hope that the energy price cap will protect many people from the brunt of energy prices going up. But they are preparing for disruption. This weekend is trying to work out how significant that disruption could be.
Sure. OK, Nick, thank you. Nick Eardley then. Now, there are warnings that anger in France over a new security pact signed by Britain, the US and Australia could cause a rift within the NATO alliance. President Macron has taken the unprecedented step of recalling his ambassadors to Australia and America for talks in the escalating row. The new defence agreement scuppered a multi-billion-pound deal for the French to supply Australia with submarines. From Paris, here's Hugh Schofield.
For the Americans, the Australians and the British, it's a new alliance to ensure stability in the Pacific and thwart the strategic ambitions of China. But Australia's decision to buy nuclear submarines from the US has left the French feeling stunned and humiliated. Their contract with Australia has been simply binned. Ordered back home by President Macron, the French ambassador to Canberra was as polite as he could be about the reasons for France's anger.
I think this has been a huge mistake, a very, very bad handling of a partnership, because it was not a contract, it was a partnership. A trust partnership that's supposed to be based on trust.
I'm with the President of France, that makes me feel better.
Just a few months ago, it was all smiles at the G7 summit in Cornwall between Presidents Biden and Macron, and all talk of cooperation and shared challenges. But behind the scenes, the French are convinced that the three English-speaking nations were hatching the plan to cut them out. The fallout is potentially very great.
This puts a big rift down the middle of the NATO alliance, pushes France towards doing more with other European countries, puts Britain very much in the camp of the Americans in dealing with the Indo-Pacific. But Britain needs a functioning NATO alliance. And my worry is that this does deep damage to NATO, going well beyond the diplomatic row over an arms deal.
Noticeably, here at the French Foreign Ministry, the one ambassador who's not being recalled is the one to London. One reason being put about is that the French regard the British role in the new pact as being that of a junior partner. But it does also suggest a willingness to keep lines of communication open. The souring of relations is in stark contrast to when President Macron visited an Australian submarine in 2018. With an election coming early next year, he has perhaps to act tough. But his angry reaction has broad support. For most people, it's not the government that's been humiliated, but France. And it's a row that could have major implications for future international security. Hugh Schofield, BBC News, Paris.
Relatives of the family of 10 Afghan civilians killed in an American drone strike in Kabul last month say the attack amounted to a war crime. US officials have admitted the airstrike, which killed 7 children, was a mistake. Jeremy Bowen has more from Kabul.
This is all that remains of the Toyota Corolla that the Americans tracked for hours as they convinced themselves entirely incorrectly that it was packed with explosives. 5 of the 7 dead children were playing in the car when it was hit. Its owner, Zamari Ahmadi, who they believed wrongly was an Islamic State bomber, had just driven it home from his work with an American aid organization. The survivors have moved out. After their terrible loss, they want compensation and resettlement in a safe country.
Yeah, today I want my message for USA and all people around the world that they are the USA make a big mistake in here and lost 10 members of our family. That I want to justice, and before also we say that we are innocent people.
This was America's last act of war before it pulled out of Afghanistan, and the decision to fire the missile smacks of panic. And what a legacy. It isn't necessarily the parting shot of the Americans, because they still have the capacity to hit targets from the air. The US relies increasingly on drones. Across the road, the neighbors are still traumatized by what they heard and saw. America's latest deadly blunder shows how dangerous its drone strategy can be for civilians. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kabul.
Let's take a look at the latest coronavirus figures. And they show that there were 30,144 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means in the last week, there was an average of 29,561 new cases per day. 8,068 people were in hospital across the UK, according to the latest figures, with 164 deaths. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. The average number of deaths per day in the last week is now 143. 89.3% of people aged 16 or over have had their first jab, while 81.6% are now double vaccinated. And travel companies say holiday bookings have surged following yesterday's announcement that the COVID rules in England are being relaxed for people going abroad. In future, countries will be ranked simply as low or high risk instead of red, amber and green. Those who are fully vaccinated will no longer need to take a COVID test before returning from a low-risk area. And that's it. I'll be back with the late news at 10 past 10 now on BBC One. Time for the news where you are. Bye for now.